Red Silk Strand. For the past few days, Mr. Oot has not been feeling well. His mind has been consumed with anger and frustration over the theft of his chickens from the chicken coop. What is strange is that the coop is located right next to his room, where his younger brother, who is bedridden due to illness, lies. And yet, the chickens were stolen. It was as if they disappeared without a trace, no sound, no screams. Even Lou, the usually alert dog, didn't bark a single time. The more Mr. Oot thought about it, the angrier he became. Was it his fate to live in a house that attracts only misfortune? For years, he has been without chickens for the Tet holidays. It's been a long time since his parents passed away, leaving him to care for a disabled younger brother. Since then, he hasn't tasted meat. Sometimes, a fox would come and eat the chickens, leaving behind only a handful of bloody feathers scattered across the coop. A few bloody feathers were even dragged to the floor of the room where he and his brother slept. Other times, thieves would sneak in when he was in the fields and steal the chickens. What a useless younger brother. He would just stare, grin awkwardly with his crooked mouth, but never speak. If only he could talk, perhaps the foxes would be scared of human voices and stay away. But his brother couldn't even walk. If he could hear someone's footsteps, they might have caught the thieves before they stole the chickens. And to make matters worse, the thieves came during the day. But Mr. Oot knew he shouldn't blame his brother. If he had to blame anyone, it would be himself. Why did he bring such a flawed creature into the world? It seemed pointless to even call him an animal with arms and legs, when he couldn't even use them for eating or personal activities. The doctors from the Western Medicine School, who were friends of the old village chief, had spoken about his brother's condition. He had mentioned something about brain degeneration or paralysis, but Mr. Oot didn't understand. He was born a farmer, and so were his parents. How could he understand the complex matters that people in power discussed? After a moment of reflection, Mr. Oot quickly grabbed his machete and went to cut some bamboo. His land had plenty of bamboo, but as a tenant farmer, he could only take the inner bamboo to use. The outer bamboo was used to make baskets, rice storage, and sometimes even fishing traps. Wealthy landowners could use bamboo for many things, but poor people like him had to make do with the bamboo's inner part, which they split into strips and used for making walls. His house was built with bamboo strips, some of which were reinforced with thicker bamboo. The walls kept the wind out and protected the house from rainstorms. With skilled hands, Mr. Oot carefully split the bamboo stalks, shaved them into thin, small pieces, and began weaving them into the bamboo mat he had started a few days ago. By evening, he had completed a rectangular door with a vertical bar slightly longer than the side, which he could attach to his house without needing to buy hinges. The door was secured with bamboo and coconut fibers. Not long ago, because the house didn't have a back door, Lou had sneaked in and eaten half a kilo of meat that someone had kindly given him. Mr. Oot's life seemed full of misfortune and no luck with meat. His brother from the neighboring village, knowing of his troubles with theft and years of failed farming, had given him half a kilo of meat. Yet that damn dog had the audacity to eat it. It was strange, though. Lou had never been this brazen. The dog could catch rats or lizards, but it had never touched the food left on the shelf before. What could have caused Lou to behave this way? As his younger brother grew, the house became quieter and more desolate. The children from the neighboring houses no longer wanted to come over and witness the sad, strange sight of his brother. They feared him, and rightly so. His brother's pale face was often accompanied by an eerie, strange smile. His wide, white eyes always stared at everyone with a hungry, unexplained look. The children whispered to each other, "His tongue is so long, it's not even human." Of course, no one dared speak these things out loud, as they feared it would upset Mr. Oot. But the more people whispered, the more the rumor spread. Mr. Oot often said, people are born with their fate, whenever he thought about caring for his disabled brother. His brother was born unfortunate, and Mr. Oot, though burdened, couldn't abandon him. There was no meat to eat at home. The main food was fish from the fields, which made Mr. Oot feel more at ease. After all, there were plenty of fish in the fields. He only needed a few fishing rods to catch enough for a meal. But his brother was hard to feed. Born into a tenant farmer's family, he might as well have been born into a wealthy one. He only ate 3 mouthfuls of rice, and even the simplest fish dishes didn't satisfy him. Sometimes, when Mr. Oot was busy, he would quickly cook some fish and set aside a portion for his brother. But when he returned, he found the fish wasn't cooked enough, and the smell was still foul. Yet his brother had eaten everything, leaving none for Mr. Oot. The look in his brother's eyes was astonishing. He seemed to enjoy eating raw fish. Normally, Mr. Oot cooked fish well, but it was impossible to make it taste right for his brother. The boy ate little but grew quickly. He smelled like the poultry that had been stolen, even though there were no chickens or ducks left alive at the house. The neighbors also complained about missing chickens and ducks, but they couldn't figure out the reason. Mr. Oot knew, though. Before, the neighbors' chickens and ducks used to come to his house, but over the years, they stopped coming altogether. It seemed that foxes were becoming more and more brazen, or perhaps the thieves were getting craftier. Who knew? The misfortune seemed to be a shared burden. But the rumors about his house being haunted by a ghost that ate raw meat were harder to ignore. They said no chickens or ducks could survive in the garden anymore because of the ghost. Mr. Oot didn't pay much attention to these rumors. He worked in the fields from dawn until late in the evening. In the mornings, he quickly cooked some rice and divided it into 2 portions, one for himself and one for his brother. This way, he had the evenings to himself, when he could enjoy a cup of tea or a few small drinks of alcohol before falling asleep. His sleep was heavy, but the mice in his house were becoming more troublesome. Late at night, he would hear them rummaging through his pots and pans. One morning, he discovered that the dried snakehead fish he had left out to sun had disappeared. What kind of rats were these? They only ate fresh fish, never touching the dried ones. Over time, losing things became a great annoyance. One night, Mr. Oot stayed up trying to catch the mice in the act. As if understanding his intentions, the mice became quiet, as if they had never been there. But when Mr. Oot was finally exhausted and managed to sleep, they would resume their destruction. One night, the full moon shone through a crack in the bamboo wall, casting a dim light in the room. In his half-asleep state, Mr. Oot thought he saw a red silk strand fluttering in the empty house. The silk appeared and disappeared, vanishing whenever he opened his eyes. It happened several times, but he dismissed it as a dream. One day, Mr. Oot was invited to a memorial feast at a neighbor's house. He drank too much and got drunk. When he returned home, he collapsed onto his bed and fell asleep immediately. In the middle of the night, he woke up to a strange sensation on his cheek. Something soft and wet, like silk, was brushing against his face. Still half drunk, he thought it was Lou jumping onto the bed and licking his face. But when he opened his eyes, he saw the red silk strand again, fluttering and twisting in the air. It was about 3 fingers wide, floating in the air, teasing him with its movements. Mr. Oot tried to grab the silk, but his hand wouldn't obey. His hand. Looking at it, Mr. Oot suddenly became startled and shouted loudly. "What are you doing, B?" In the quiet of the night, his shout surely echoed far and wide. It made B jump with the sudden change in his expression. His eyes no longer glimmered with the strange light they once had. His lips sagged once again, as they always had. But what was different was the look of regret on his face, as if he had just missed out on a child's delight. Something's wrong. This kid has changed a lot. It's like he comes from a dark place that no one can understand, Mr. Oot thought, restless until the roosters crowed in the morning. Today, after finishing the rice planting, Mr. Oot went straight to his brother's house in the next village. The two of them had been close since childhood, so there were no secrets between them. "Brother Tam, I'm really worried. B has changed more and more. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm not sure I can handle it," he said to his brother sadly. Old Mr. Tam looked at his younger brother with sympathy, mixed with concern. He had heard many things about his nephew, but didn't know where to begin the conversation. "I know you're struggling because of him. But what can we do? After all, he's our flesh and blood." He paused, then fell silent. Mr. Oot shared the strange events that had been happening with his brother. Mr. Tam listened quietly for a while, then advised his brother. "If you want to do something, you need to understand the cause. I've heard many frightening things about B, but I remain unsure. Sometimes I think of telling you, but I fear it might upset you. With just the two of us, you're out in the fields, so you don't know what's happening at home. If you want to understand B's behavior, you'll have to secretly watch him." After that, Mr. Tam hurried into the house and came out with a chicken tied by its legs, handing it to Mr. Oot. "You look so pale. Take this chicken and cook it with some green beans for soup. It's all I can do to help." On his way back, Mr. Oot had only gone halfway when it began to rain heavily. The rain was pouring down, and lightning flashed all across the sky. The road became slippery under the blinding light of the lightning. When he arrived home, he quickly placed the chicken in the chicken coop, then rushed out to the fields. "If I don't hurry, the rice will be washed away," he thought, running faster and faster. Just a few steps away from the field, Mr. Oot suddenly stopped. It wasn't because he was exhausted, but because he remembered his brother's words, "You have to watch and see what B does when I'm out in the fields." The back door of the house appeared dimly in the rain and flashes of lightning. The dog Lou didn't run out to greet him as usual. He wondered where it had gone, perhaps after the neighbor's dog. The door he had installed to prevent foxes from getting into the chicken coop was only a few steps away when he heard the loud clucking of the chickens. "It must be those damn foxes," he muttered. Grabbing a stick, Mr. Oot pushed open the door. As it creaked on its hinges, he was confronted by the same eerie red silk ribbon that had appeared on another night. This time, however, it was much longer and glowing blood-red in the flash of the lightning. As soon as there was movement, the ribbon darted quickly towards the front of the house. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared. Mr. Oot looked into the chicken coop and saw only a pile of bloody feathers. Rushing to the bed, he saw B.'s face, seemingly asleep, but strangely, the corner of his mouth was stained with blood. It wasn't the foxes that ate the chicken, Mr. Oot thought. The chickens had died because of that red ribbon. But what was that ribbon? And why was B.'s mouth covered in blood while he slept? After that night, Mr. Oot began to pay attention to more strange occurrences in the house. The farmers in the fields who got leeches on their legs and bled were nothing out of the ordinary. When others were bitten by leeches, the wound dried up by the second day, but Mr. Oot's leech bites never healed. Instead, they festered with yellowish liquid and pus. Sometimes the wounds persisted for weeks or even a month without healing. Finally, he had to wrap them in bandages for treatment. Could it be because of that red ribbon? He wondered, trying to shake off the thought as too bizarre. But, what was it really? So he began planning to find out the truth. In January, the fields were dry and the grass was burned. The rice harvest had been completed, so everyone went to the fields to catch rats and birds. Mr. Oot caught many birds and roasted them, filling the air with their delicious aroma. But B didn't eat. Lately, he had been looking increasingly thin. Seeing this made Mr. Oot feel sorrowful, knowing that blood is thicker than water. That afternoon, a neighbor butchered a pig and brought some meat as a gift. Mr. Oot tossed the meat onto the bamboo rack in the kitchen and hurried to set up his fishing rods for the evening. After walking a few steps into the garden, he suddenly remembered the red ribbon, so he turned back. The door with its squeaky hinges had been silenced after Mr. Oot applied some mud to the mechanism. Now, when he pushed it open, there was no sound. In the half-light, Mr. Oot saw the red ribbon swirling in the kitchen. It seemed to be playing, full of mischievous joy, unaware of the intruder. Carefully. Slowly. Step by step. Mr. Oot approached the ribbon. The stars in the January sky were shining brightly, and the light of the stars shone through the holes in the roof, casting light on the silent kitchen. Mr. Oot opened his eyes wide to see the strange object that had haunted his dreams. The cause of the deaths of the chickens and ducks. And, for 5 years, the reason he had not tasted meat. Anger. Hatred. Fury. All because of that cursed ribbon. Suddenly, he froze. His body felt cold, as if he had been submerged in water for a long time. The ribbon appeared like a tongue, with tiny sensory filaments sticking out of its body. These filaments quivered, twisting and scraping against the meat on the bamboo rack. Then, it disappeared towards the front of the house, only to reappear immediately. The movement was repeated with the regular, choo-choo, sounds of a child enjoying their meal. Mr. Oot's head spun with thoughts. A human tongue? Impossible. A human tongue can't be that long. Just by estimating in the kitchen, it must be over 3 meters long, not including where it starts. But it was clearly a tongue, not a ribbon. That tongue was licking the fresh meat that lay there. Each time it did so, the meat grew smaller before Mr. Oot's eyes. Mr. Oot suddenly remembered the rumors and became terrified. His tongue stiffened as he watched the red ribbon dance around the meat. His trembling hand searched in the dark for something. Anything that could give him courage in this moment of fear. The kitchen was empty, nothing in reach. His hand, shaking uncontrollably, brushed against something warm. It was the container for roasting birds from the afternoon. The heat from the ashes did not calm Mr. Oot but only heightened his despair. He couldn't run away. Not with Be Still inside. And so, he lunged at the hideous ribbon, the devil's tongue that had been feasting on the meat in his house. The devil's tongue thrashed violently with terrifying strength. Its slippery, slimy body made it even harder to grab. Mr. Oot was knocked into the container of hot ashes. No matter what, he would not let go. In his desperate moment, an idea flashed through his mind. He quickly grabbed some ashes and tightened his grip on the frenzied ribbon. In the room, there were groans from Bee, mixed with the eerie howls of the dog Lou. The dog's howls were cut off, trembling with fear. Mr. Oot didn't care. He had finally caught the tongue with his ash-covered hands. But it was strong. It tossed him around, pulling him into the bedroom. Bee moaned, thrashing about on the bed. The light from the thousands of stars shone through the dilapidated porch roof, illuminating Bee's face. Mr. Oot screamed in terror when he saw it. Oh no! It wasn't his little brother anymore. It was a demon with a long, disgusting tongue, trying to wrap itself around him. The tongue, which had initially retracted, now extended forward, coiling several times around Mr. Oot's neck. Its tip, covered in slime and saliva, felt around his face. Terrified by what was happening, Mr. Oot grabbed a sickle from the side of the bed and swung it.